Hello, my name is Alicia Murray, and this is a presentation about the writing resource, Spectrum Writing. The purpose of this investigation was to identify how this resource represents writing and writing instruction. What is Spectrum Writing? Spectrum Writing is a writing resource that is formatted as a workbook. The workbook includes 8 chapters that are designed to improve and strengthen students' writing skills. This pie graph illustrates the distribution of the content within the Spectrum Writing workbook. 73% focuses on styles of writing, 14% focuses on forms and purposes of writing, and 13% focuses on ideas and details. Why did I choose to investigate Spectrum Writing? I'm someone who prefers teaching writing using a workshop or mini lesson approach, and I thought the resource would be easy to implement into my teaching style. Additionally, Spectrum Writing could be used as a supplemental resource in addition to the writing curriculum. Lastly, each lesson has a clear and distinct purpose. While reviewing the resource, I identified 5 main patterns. First, the text is organized into 3 categories, being ideas and details, forms and purposes of writing, and styles of writing. Second, the order of the text categories appears to be chronological. Third, each lesson contains an explanation, model, and area for independent practice, giving each lesson a clear sequence to follow. Fourth, the resource contains many graphic organizers and visuals to help explain each concept. Lastly, each lesson focuses on one specific concept, giving each lesson a clear focus and purpose. My primary question I wanted to investigate was, how does one lesson achieve the learning objective? While all the lessons seemed to be effective, it appeared that the resource was assuming students would master each concept after one lesson. This does not seem realistic to me, so I'm curious why there aren't additional lessons for each of the subcategories in each chapter. Along with my primary question, I also had 2 secondary questions. First, I wondered why each lesson was so succinct. As stated earlier, it is puzzling that each concept was only one lesson instead of multiple lessons. Another secondary question I had was, why did the lengths of the lessons vary? It appears that some of the lessons would only take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete, whereas other lessons could take about 25 to 30 minutes. I was curious in investigating why the length of each lesson varied. To investigate my primary question, being, how does one lesson achieve the learning objective, I began looking at each chapter and lesson more closely. I realized that each chapter resembles a unit. Initially, it didn't appear that the lessons had any correlation to each other than their relation to the overall topic. However, each lesson focuses on specific concepts that gradually lead students to publishing a piece that relates to the chapter's focus. The photo on this slide represents the first lesson in Chapter 2. This lesson contains many explanations and visual illustrations to help students understand the purpose of writing. While the workbook only focuses on this concept for one lesson, Donald Graves reminds us that modeling opportunities are infinite. A teacher could use this first lesson to introduce the concept of the purpose of writing and create or use additional lessons and activities to reinforce this concept. As stated earlier, upon initially reviewing the resource, it appeared that the lessons varied in length. However, the lessons gradually get longer throughout the chapter. This photo shows Lesson 6, which is much longer in length and provides more explanations and more opportunities for independent practice than earlier lessons. Jana Meek states that rhetoric or composition text gives students dicta and directives about how to speak or write. This is illustrated throughout the Spectrum Writing workbook because the text is providing students with a scripted way to learn about writing skills and concepts. Providing students with a scripted way to learn about how to write is not allowing them to find their voice. These photos show the first 2 pages of the last lesson in Chapter 2. This lesson allows students to pre-write, draft, revise, and publish an opinion statement. While this lesson is intended to be an independent lesson, I think this lesson would be more effective if a teacher used this to model the writing process for students. Donald Graves mentions that children need to hear the teacher speak aloud the thinking that accompanies the process. If a teacher would model this lesson, I believe that students would have a better understanding of the writing process and would produce published pieces that represent their personal strengths and voice. These photos show the final 2 pages of Lesson 8. This step is where students are revising, proofreading, and publishing their work. In the final lesson, students are putting the skills they learned into practice by composing a written piece. This finding answers one of my secondary questions, being, why does the length of the lessons vary? What I realized is that the final lesson of each chapter spans over the course of 4 to 5 pages because it is scaffolding the drafting process for students. Jane and Meeg mentions that most pieces of empirical research on the adolescent writer focus upon the product or products rather than upon the process or processes of their writing. As illustrated throughout this chapter, the Spectrum Writing Workbook appears to break down the writing skills and concepts for students. However, each chapter is centered around the goal of helping students publish a final piece by incorporating all the concepts they learned throughout the chapter. What have I learned? First, I learned that modeling opportunities are infinite with a writing resource or text. While writing resources are sometimes meant to be a scripted curricula, teachers can modify a resource and tailor it to their teaching style. Next, it is important to review a resource and evaluate its effectiveness and implications on writing. Before investigating Spectrum Writing, I did not think it would be an effective resource. However, this investigation allowed me to reconsider the ways this resource could be used effectively. Lastly, I learned that investigating a resource challenges your beliefs about instruction. Throughout my investigation of the Spectrum Writing resource, I was evaluating the types of learning opportunities that the lessons and activities would provide students. This allowed me to see the value and purpose of investigating a text because it allows you to expand your thinking about writing and writing instruction.